The screaming tone of the emergency alarm inside the main assembly line of the Hoang industrial conglomerate did not sound like metal. It sounded like an admission of structural failure. At precisely 4 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, the primary forging line ground to a complete, shuddering halt. The central transmission shaft, a custom-forged 6-meter cylinder of high-tensile alloy steel imported from Germany, had developed a microscopic, deep-core fracture. Every digital sensor across the $12 million automated line flashed crimson. The internal ultrasonic scanning array could detect the structural resonance of the split, but because the fracture lay deep within the radius of a non-standard internal counterweight housing, the laser scanners could not map its precise origin or depth. The international automation consultants on the corporate payroll took one look at the telemetry data and gave their unanimous verdict. The component was unrepairable by modern automated means, and a custom replacement would take 45 days to forge, ship, and calibrate. Every single day, the line sat idle cost the company $80,000 in contractual penalties. Mr. Hoang, the Senior Vice President of Technical Operations and the Principal Architect of the facility's total transition to robotic automation, stood in the central control room with his hands gripped tightly behind his back. His tailored gray suit reflected the cold neon glare of the diagnostic monitors. To him, this line was not just an assembly of steel. It was the physical proof of his lifelong philosophy that human labor was an obsolete variable, an uncalibrated risk that needed to be systematically eradicated from modern engineering. For 10 years, he had systematically replaced veteran machinists with programmable logic controllers and automated optical inspection arrays. Now, the machine he trusted above all else was staring back at him with a dead monitor and a red warning code. "There is one option remaining, Father," Lan said, stepping into the control room. She was 26 years old, holding a master's degree in robotic automation systems from one of the top polytechnic institutes in Europe, and serving as the lead diagnostics engineer for the facility. She laid a printed schematic on the steel desk, her fingers tracing a line far away from the high-tech industrial park, deep into the old manual industrial sector near the river docks. The ultrasonic scanners are misreading the stress wave reflections because of the internal counterweight geometry. The software is trying to interpret a curved fracture using linear algorithms. There is a man who doesn't use algorithms. He works in the old railway repair yard sector. Mr. Hoang did not look at the schematic. He looked at his daughter, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We are a Tier 1 precision manufacturing group, Lan. We operate with intolerances measured in microns. If German-engineered automated plasma arc systems cannot isolate the boundaries of an internal alloy fracture, no manual laborer using primitive tools can touch it. You are letting sentimentality interfere with structural diagnostics." "It isn't sentimentality," Lan replied quietly, her voice remaining perfectly flat, matching the cold discipline her father had drilled into her since childhood. "The automated systems are blind because they require visual or wave reflection symmetry to calculate an intervention path. A human being with metallurgical experience doesn't look for symmetry. They look for the anomaly. You've watched him work, Father. He doesn't look at the surface. He listens to the metal." 3 hours later, a black luxury sedan pulled up outside a rusted corrugated iron structure at the dead end of Industrial Lane. The air here smelled of heavy sulfur, stale machine oil, and burnt flux, a stark contrast to the filtered, climate-controlled cleanrooms of the Hoang conglomerate. The sign above the wooden sliding door was faded to the point of illegibility, showing only 2 hand-painted words, Khiem Mechanics. Inside, the only illumination came from a single industrial bulb hanging from a frayed cord, and the dull orange glow of a charcoal forge tucked into the rear corner. The floor was covered in iron filings and heavy hand tools that looked older than the factory across town. Khiem did not look up when the heavy car doors closed outside, nor did he look up when the polished leather shoes of Mr. Hoang stepped onto the oil-stained concrete of his workshop. He was sitting on a low wooden bench, his left leg stretched out straight at an unnatural angle, the knee visibly stiffened by an old, deep tissue trauma. He was 32 years old, his frame broad but lean, his skin permanently marked with the gray-blue shadows of embedded iron dust and ancient arc-burn scars. In his right hand, he held a small, 4-ounce ball-peen hammer with a worn hickory handle. He was tapping a small iron bracket, his head tilted slightly to the side, listening to the pitch of the metal with the intensity of a musician tuning a cello. Mr. Hoang stepped into the center of the shung, his eyes scanning the grease-covered walls and the outdated oxyacetylene tanks with an expression of undisguised professional revulsion. He did not introduce himself. He did not offer a hand. He simply gestured to his driver, who laid a thick, leather-bound folder of technical prints and ultrasonic telemetry data onto a rusted oil drum next to Khiem's bench. "My daughter claims you have a primitive understanding of alloy resonance," Mr. Hoang said, his voice cutting through the steady tap-tap of Khiem's hammer like a cold blade. "The primary transmission shaft of my automated line has a deep core internal fracture. It is high-tensile chrome-molybdenum steel. My engineers tell me that if a manual torch touches that specific alloy without uniform induction, preheating to exactly 350 degrees Celsius, the thermal shock will propagate the fracture through the entire core within 3 seconds. It is a piece of precision machinery worth $300,000 on its own. It is currently sitting on a heavy flatbed truck outside your door." Khiem stopped his hammer. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only with the faint, rhythmic ticking of the cooling charcoal forge. He did not look at the technical prints on the oil drum. He slowly turned his head, his dark, weathered eyes looking past Mr. Hoang to where Lan stood near the entrance of the workshop. She did not speak, but her eyes were fixed on his hands, her posture tense. "If your machines know so much about the alloy, Mr. Hoang," Khiem said, his voice low, gravelly, and entirely devoid of deference, "why did they break it?" Mr. Hoang's face remained perfectly expressionless, but the skin around his jaw tightened. The machine did not break it. An uncalibrated material inclusion from the steel mill caused an internal stress concentration during a high-velocity cycle. The line is automated. It cannot predict an internal manufacturing flaw from an external supplier. I did not come here for a lecture on engineering from someone who works in a scrapyard. I came because my daughter requested a demonstration of your manual capabilities." He stepped closer to the oil drum, tapping his gold signet ring against the iron rim. "I am giving you 10 days. I will not provide you with our corporate automated welding consumables, nor will I pay for induction heating equipment to be moved here. If you accept the task, you will use whatever primitive methods you possess to seal that core. If the ultrasonic scan at the end of the 10th day shows even a micron of residual porosity or crack propagation, I will invoke the zoning laws I control to clear this entire block of old workshops for our new logistics terminal. Your lease will be terminated immediately, and your tools will be seized for scrap value to cover the cost of the transportation. If you succeed, I will pay you your standard manual taho and wage by the meter, and I will allow my daughter to continue her field studies of manual workshops without further interference. Do you accept the terms, or do you wish to admit that your manual trade has no place in a modern industrial economy?" Khiem did not look at the folder. He slowly stood up from his bench, his left leg dragging slightly against the concrete floor, with a distinct, heavy scrape. He stood a full head taller than Mr. Hoang, his broad shoulders casting a massive shadow across the blueprints. He did not ask for a contract. He did not argue about the risk to his Shun. "Tell your men to unload the shaft," Khiem said plainly, "and tell them to leave the workshop. Your clothes are too clean for what happens in here." The flatbed trailer, carrying the transmission shaft, remained parked in the center of the gravel lot outside the workshop until midnight. Khiem adjusted his leatherback brace, checked the heavy steel chains on his overhead gantry crane, and threw the breaker switch for the exhaust fans. The low hum of the ventilation system was the only sound that broke the cold stillness of the river district. Mr. Hoang had departed hours ago in his sedan, but Lan remained by the iron doors, her gray wool coat buttoned to the chin. She did not offer to help, nor did she provide unnecessary commentary. She simply watched as Khiem moved with mechanical precision. He dragged his left foot across the concrete floor, a dull scraping sound that marked the boundary of every movement he made. With his right hand, he guided the 3-ton hoist, lowering the massive German steel shaft onto 2 heavy, V-shaped iron stanchions. The alloy cylinder sat motionless, its polished surface catching the amber glow of the hanging bulb like a dormant weapon. Khiem picked up his small ball-peen hammer, balanced the hickory handle between his callosed finger, and leaned close to the core. He began to tap the steel, moving down the 6-meter length at intervals of precisely 3 inches. Tap, tap, the sound was crisp, high-pitched, and clear as it vibrated through the solid outer radius of the metal body. Then, near the base of the non-standard counterweight housing, the resonance changed, dropping into a flat, hollow thud. Thud, stopped, his eyes focusing on a patch of steel that appeared completely flawless to the naked eye. The internal ultrasonic array placed the defect 2 inches to the left of that housing, Lan noted, her voice steady. "Your automated array measures the reflection of a wave after it has already hit the boundary of the internal curve," Khiem said. He picked up a piece of soapstone and drew a sharp white line, exactly 3 inches, to the right of the machine's calculation. "The machine believes what it sees on the screen. But the steel doesn't lie about where it is carrying the weight," he added. Lan walked over to the stanchion, looking closely at the chalk mark, then at the technical schematic displayed on her tablet. The software algorithm was still flashing a data correction error, unable to reconcile the manual worker's calculation with its programming. "If you drill at that coordinate and you are wrong, you will penetrate the central lubrication channel," she warned him quietly. "I am not going to drill it," Khiem replied, reaching for a heavy carbon arc gouging torch from the lower shelf of his bench. "Drilling creates a hard corner inside the core, and a hard corner is just another place, for a second, crack to start tomorrow." He pulled a heavy canvas welding hood over his face, the dark glass shield dropping into place with a sharp click. The carbon torch roared to life with a violent, high-frequency hiss, casting a brilliant, blinding blue light across the Shun walls. Superheated air, compressed at 80 pounds per square inch, tore into the flawless surface of the alloy steel shaft. Sparks flew in a massive, molten arc, showering the concrete floor with white-hot iron dross that hissed as it cooled. Khiem held the torch with both hands, his knuckles turning white under his heavy leather gloves as the arc pressure pushed back. His left leg was locked straight against the base of the iron stanchion, acting as a rigid anchor for his entire frame. The heat inside the immediate radius of the forge rose rapidly, the thermometer on the wall climbing past 40 degrees Celsius. Through the dark glass of his hood, Khiem watched the molten pool, tracking the hidden boundary of the internal fracture. The carbon arc dug deeper, removing layer after layer of the expensive alloy, exposing the dark, jagged line beneath the surface. It lay exactly where his hammer had signaled, 3 inches away from the position the corporate engineers had sworn was absolute. Lan watched the glowing cavity open in the steel, her fingers tightening around the edge of her tablet, as the truth revealed itself. The machine had been blind to the structural reality of the shape, but the crippled welder had found it in the dark. By the 5th day of the test, the physical cost of the manual labor began to mark Khiem's frame with visible strain. The continuous preheating required for the chrome-molybdenum alloy meant the charcoal forge had to be kept alive around the clock. The air inside the workshop was permanently thick with the dry, choking dust of burnt limestone flux and vaporized manganese. Khiem's left knee, stripped of its fluid cartilage during an industrial accident years prior, had swollen to twice its normal size. To maintain his balance on the elevated steel scaffolding, he had taken a thick leather horse rein strap from the wall. He bound his crippled thigh tightly to the iron railing of the platform, forcing his body into an unyielding vertical position. Every hour spent holding the 90-amp torch at a constant 45-degree angle sent severe muscle spasms down his lower back. Yet, his hand did not waver by a single fraction of a millimeter as he deposited the first filling pass into the core. He was not using standard commercial wire. He was using an old batch of specialized low-hydrogen vanadium alloy rods. He had gathered them years ago from a decommissioned locomotive repair yard down the river, knowing their specific structural worth. My father's daily tracking report shows that you have refused to log your progress with our procurement office, Lan said. She stood at the base of the platform, holding a metal thermos of fresh water she had brought from the town market. Khiem did not stop his work. He finished the length of the current rod, broke the slag with a chipping hammer, and blew the dust away. Your father's procurement office wants a digital signature on a screen to satisfy an insurance company, Khiem said, without looking down. A signature doesn't change the cooling rate of the weld metal, and it doesn't stop the internal grain from coarsening. He took the thermos from her hand, drank deeply without resetting his posture, and handed it back with a brief nod. He believes that because I work in this place, I am desperate for his supervisor position in the new automated terminal, Khiem muttered. He wants to prove that everyone has a price, and that the price can always be calculated in a corporate ledger. He doesn't understand why you stayed after he threatened your lease, Lan whispered, looking at the black scars on his boots. He thinks you are either too stubborn to see the future, or too ignorant to know when you have been beaten. Khiem smiled, a tight, grim line that did not reach his eyes, and selected a fresh 3/16-inch rod from the heated dry box. I stayed because if I leave, this town will have nothing left but machines that know how to run, but don't know how to endure. On the 9th night, the temperature outside dropped significantly, and a heavy, freezing rain began to beat against the iron roof. The sudden atmospheric shift caused a rapid, uneven co-cooling of the massive steel cylinder resting on the stanchions. A sharp metallic ping echoed through the workshop, a sound that every veteran metalworker recognizes as the death knell of an alloy. A secondary stress fracture had opened at the root of the counterweight housing, driven by the contraction of the massive base. Lan ran toward the scaffolding, her face pale under the dim light as she saw the fresh hairline crack under the slag. "It's over, Khiem," she said, her voice shaking as she reached for the main breaker switch to shut down the gas tanks. "The thermal tension is too high. Your legs is bleeding through the leather strap. If you don't stop, the core will split entirely." Khiem reached out his heavy gloved hand, his fingers clamping onto her wrist with an iron grip that stopped her instantly. "Do not touch that switch," he commanded, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps as the pain in his knee flared. "If we let this cool down now, with an open stress fracture at the root, the steel will lock that defect into its memory forever." He looked at her, his face covered in gray soot, his eyes bloodshot from 60 hours of continuous exposure to the shield gas. "Go to the rear storeroom. Under the old workbench, there is a small wooden crate containing raw asbestos shielding blankets. Bring them out, soak them in the waste oil from the lathe, and pack them around the outer radius of the housing." Lan hesitated for a single second, her technical training telling her that manual oil cooling was an uncontrolled hazard. But she looked at the absolute, calm certainty in Khiem's eyes and turned toward the dark rear of the workshop without a word. She dragged the heavy crate across the floor, her hands staining with black grease as she soaked the thick insulating fabric. Working together in the dense, choking smoke of the vaporizing oil, they wrapped the hot metal core like a wounded soldier. Khiem lowered his hood once more, his right arm trembling with absolute physical exhaustion as he began the final repair pass. The liquid fire from his torch flowed into the run, fighting against the cold contraction of the steel in a silent, desperate battle. A silence settled over the machine shop, so profound that one could hear the last hailstones melting against the corrugated iron roof. Mr. Hoang leaned down, his index finger lightly tracing the smooth surface of the handcrafted weld, feeling the chill of the chrome molybdenum steel, a material now fully tamed by human hands. The blank check, worth billions of dong, lay motionless on the grease-stained wooden workbench. Yet the power dynamic between the two men in the room had completely shifted. The four international experts slowly packed away their high-end laser scanning equipment. Not a word was spoken. They simply bowed to Khiem before quietly walking out the door, a silent acknowledgement of a true master. "I didn't come here to debate the relative worth of million-dollar machines," Mr. Hoang said. His voice had lost the sharp edge of a senior executive, turning instead deep and murky, like a river in flood season. "I spent my entire life building a factory devoid of human presence, believing that algorithmic precision was the only answer to every economic challenge. But today, those very algorithms failed in the face of a hidden fracture, and it was these bleeding hands of yours that saved the corporation's honor." Khiem did not look at the check. Instead, using an old rag soaked in kerosene, he slowly wiped the soot stains from the handle of his technical tapping hammer. "Humans are not faulty variables in your system," Mr. Khiem said, his voice flat, yet heavy as a cast iron anvil striking the ground. His machines could repeat an action 1,000,000 times without error, yet they never knew pain. And because they knew no pain, they would never grasp the limits of endurance. This weld held firm, not because I was superior to his scanners, but because I knew that if I let go, this hillside, this workshop, and his daughter's trust would all collapse. Mr. Hoang looked over at Lan, the daughter he had sent to Europe's most elite academies to learn how to operate soulless machines. Now she stood beside a disabled welder, her hands stained with the pitch-black soot of insulation blankets, yet her eyes shone with a light he had never witnessed in those sterile cleanroom control centers. He stepped forward, took Khiem's crude, handwritten invoice in both hands, carefully folded it into quarters, and tucked it into the breast pocket of his suit jacket, right where the plans for staff layoffs used to reside. I will pay you exactly according to the length of the weld, just as you requested, down to the last penny, and the clause regarding the repossession of this workshop is officially voided as of this moment. He turned and walked away. The powerful manager's silhouette appeared, slightly, stooped, against the early morning chill, the hem of his elegant suit jacket stained black by a large smudge of coal dust from Khiem's rag. It was the first trace of actual manual labor to cling to him after 30 years behind a glass-topped desk, a mark that money could not wash away. Lan did not follow her father out to the luxury car idling on the road. Instead, she walked over to the scaffolding and bent down to pick up the cold vanadium welding rods scattered across the concrete floor. When Khiem sat down, his left leg was completely rigid, unable to bend or straighten because his thigh muscles had been locked in place for 10 days and nights. She offered no forced words of comfort. She simply took the remaining warm water from the thermos, poured it onto a clean cloth, and gently applied it to his swollen knee. The sounds of the outside world began to rise again. The long, mournful blast of a freight train whistle from the river terminal, signaling the start of a new day, and the familiar, rhythmic clanging of hammers from nearby machine shops. Mr. Hoang's industrial complex resumed operations that very afternoon. The massive machine shaft spun steadily at 3,000 revolutions per minute, completely free of vibration or misalignment. Engineers marveled at the wonders of German technology, unaware that deep within that chrome steel core, the blood of a welder had fused with the crystal matrix, ensuring it would never fracture again. A person's true worth lies not in the technology they possess, but in how steadfastly they stand when the systems around them collapse. If you believe that the integrity and craftsmanship of unsung workers remain the world's most solid foundation, please share your thoughts below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories about human character and metal forged in the fires of adversity.